Horror Fanatic here. Let's talk about Teenage Wasteland. Released in 1989 and is the third installment in the Sleepaway Camp series. Teenage Wasteland, which is of course a reference to the immortal rock band The Who, was filmed back-to-back with its predecessor, Unhappy Campers. Filming the two films back-to-back allowed the filmmakers to reuse the same set, as well as let us see Pamela Springsteen return to the role of Angela Baker. Between the two films, Teenage Wasteland and Unhappy Campers, I think Teenage Wasteland is by far the superior film. The kills are inventive and plentiful, racking up an impressive 16 kills before the end of the film, with most of the kills occurring on screen, which is in stark contrast to Unhappy Campers, which had more than a few kills happening off screen. I'm not sure if the film's director, Michael A. Simpson, just needed the time to warm up, but the self-aware slapstick humor works much better this time around. Now, since Teenage Wasteland wastes no time getting down to business, neither will I. Teenage Wasteland opens a year after the conclusion of the previous film. The film opens with an underprivileged youth, Maria, getting ready for her first day at camp. The film throws in a quick use of the breast part trope before we even get through to the opening credits. But don't get too attached to this character, as she gets killed rather quickly by Angela, who's driving a garbage truck. I don't know what city this is supposed to take place in, but these people were way too oblivious or just don't care that a woman's getting run down in the street by a garbage truck. After Angela nails her, she throws Maria's body into the compactor and assumes her place at camp. After scrawling a warning message on the wall, I guess. Angela Baker returns to Camp Rolling Hills, now under the new ownership of Lily and Herman Miranda, and renamed Camp New Horizons. Unable to fill the camp to capacity with paying youths, Lily and Herman have used the U.S. government to flip the bill, filling the camp with underprivileged youths, under the presumption that is a social experiment. Everyone sees through this, though, and fairly quickly, including the reporter, who doesn't focus on it at all, and instead focuses on the camp's grisly, bloody history, as well as interviewing the kids. While preparing to leave, the reporter asks Angela, who is working under the guise of being Maria, if she can score her some coke. This is due to Angela using hard drug use as the excuse for her more aged appearance when compared to the other teen actors. Angela offers to get her some, but instead gives her a mixture of deadly cleaning chemicals, which she ingests and then quickly dies. Apparently the reporter was supposed to have a much more elaborate death, with her whole crew dying in an explosion because their van's brake lines get cut by Angela. But due to budgetary constrictions, this didn't happen. The campers are split into 3 groups, and Lily is placed in the group under the care of Herman, with fellow campers Snowboy, Jan, and Peter. Jan has been flirting with Herman throughout the first part of this day, and it's pretty hilarious. While fishing for that night's dinner, Peter and Snowboy joke with Angela about the reason for the absence of Herman and Jan, to which Angela is more than a little upset, and when she catches the two of them together, she beats them to death with a stick. That night, Angela kills Peter by placing one of his fireworks, which, in her defense, he was being a bit of a dick with, in his mouth while he sleeps, and setting it off. This, of course, wakes up Snowboy. The explosion wakes up Snowboy, who is then beat to death with a stick by Angela. The following morning, Angela Baker funeral pyres the lot of them, before heading off to try her luck with group number 2, led by Lily and containing the campers Bobby, Cindy, Riff, and Arab. She tells Lily that Herman has asked her to switch with Arab, and when she returns Arab to Group 1's site, she kills her by cutting her head off with an axe. She returns to camp in time to witness an argument between Cindy and Riff.
You dirty nigger.
Holy shit. Okay, that's more than an argument, but Cindy has already been shown to be more than a little racist.
God, that Tony guy is so cute. He's Mexican.
Turns out, I'm not the only one who isn't down with Cindy's bigoted bullshit. As during the chess game that follows the fight, Angela drops Cindy from a flagpole, killing her. Angela returns to the campsite and tells Lily that Cindy is resting in one of the camp's cabins. Angela takes a moment for a little historical reimagining. God, I hate this song so much.
I love the trees and forests, I'm always having fun. Oh, I'm a happy camper, I love the clear blue sky.
Bobby then makes a move on Angela while they're tied together during the next trust exercise.
I like being tied up, especially next to you. It turns me on.
Stop it!
I thought you wanted it!
No!
She's able to curb his advances by telling him to meet her later by the cabins. She then tricks Lily into going with her again under the guise of a trust game, under the pretense that they'll go check on Cindy at the cabins. But instead of checking on Cindy, Lily gets buried up to her neck in garbage and her head run over with a lawnmower. That night, Angela meets Bobby by the cabins and ties him up to a tree. He thinks he's in store for some naughty sexy times, and is actually really hilarious in this scene.
But don't tell anyone, okay? Because if the wrong person found out, I could lose an election someday.
But he's not going to have to worry about that, as Angela rips his arms off with a jeep. She then returns to the campsite one last time, and kills Riff by staking him through the tent.
Ow! Ow! Hey! Ow! Ow! Ow!
The next morning, Angela tries her luck with the final group, led by the late arriving Officer Barry Whitmore, father of Sean Whitmore. Remember from the last film, Molly's guy? The one that lost his head.
Electroshock, plus every kind of pill you ever heard of, plus an operation. I'm completely cured. If I wasn't, they wouldn't have let me out. How do you know so much about me?
My dad's a cop. He hoped to arrest you. Oh, you should have heard him the day you got out.
It's too bad. Wait till he hears what's happened to you.
And contains the campers, Marcia, Tony, Greg, and Anita. Up until now, this group has actually been seen having a pretty great time, with Officer Whitmore being both lenient, yet stern, and even going into his past with the death of his son. Although, I do have to call one point of bullshit here.
Poor baby.
I hate to ask this, but whatever happened to Angela Baker?
Nobody knows. There are no pictures of her since 7 years ago. Plus, when she was 18, her juvenile records were destroyed. So all we have to go on are descriptions.
Yeah, on that. There is no way that through the psychiatrist department or her getting released that no one took her photo. No. Angela tells Officer Whitmore that she's been told to switch with Marcia, who's been having a fantastic time with fellow camper Tony.
Wait.
What's wrong?
Nothing. Just if we're gonna make love, you have to hold one of these. Okay.
I'm moving to Ohio.
Obviously, she objects. But Officer Whitmore is quick to catch on to Angela's ruse, and tries to return her to her previous camp. So she fakes a leg injury along the way, forcing Officer Whitmore, who's being accompanied by Marcia, to deviate their course and take Angela to the main cabins instead, where she reveals herself to them. This we think would lead up to a very climatic fight between Officer Whitmore and Angela, as they've been hyping the two of them the whole film. But it isn't, as she shoots him a few times in the chest. The most notable thing about this is that Angela Baker uses a gun, which is very uncommon for any slasher killer typically to do, with the exception of a few notable films such as Miss 45. After killing Officer Whitmore, she runs down Marcia and takes her hostage. She then tricks the final three campers, Tony, Greg, and Anita, into a deadly game of find the missing camper. and even though they complete the task in the required amount of time, both Anita and Greg die. Mostly this is due to Angela finding them boring. And with that, she leaves Angela and Marcia to their happily ever after. Actually, what happens next is fucking great, as Marcia loses her shit and goes hog wild on Angela. The fight becomes pretty one-sided very quickly, and ends with Angela being taken away in an ambulance, while Marcia and Tony sit out in the back of the cop car, and reflect on their future together.
Look, everything's gonna be okay. I'll move to Ohio. We can be together forever. Get married.
Tony,
What?
I kind of already have a boyfriend.
Oh boy, actually, never mind. It ends with Tony feeling used, and Angela Baker killing an EMT and a cop. Since Teenage Wasteland was filmed back-to-back with Unhappy Campers, my feelings on the Dread location fall about the same. Though Teenage Wasteland's extensive use of the outdoor shots does give the film a much cheaper appearance, and I would have liked to see them utilize the actual camp more, perhaps revisiting some of the cabins more heavily, or even the outhouse. But as far as my serious gripes go, that's honestly about it, as I loved Pamela Springsteen's performance this time around. Angela Baker comes off as more unstable and unpredictable than she did in her previous films. So, kudos. But, like in Unhappy Campers, Angela Baker once again forgoes subtlety for brute force. Which, honestly, isn't surprising, as this is once again of the known subtype. So, that's just sort of how the game is played. Her preferred weapon seems to be a stick, but while this character is just as fun this time around, she's also far more inconsistent. This time with her murderous habits being triggered from everything from her being teased, to her merely feeling that other campers are boring. The climax is greatly improved this time around, and instead of just two girls running through the woods, and a few off-screen deaths, we actually get a pretty solid beatdown. Sure, I'll admit, it's no epic battle between good and evil, but after watching Angela just walk through people for the last two films, it's kind of nice to see someone able to turn the tables on her. Sure, I will be the first to admit that when compared to the climax of the original film, this ending is still pretty terrible. However, when viewed in context to other endings that exist here in late addition to slasher series land, this climax is actually pretty solid. Next, we have the victim pool, which is numerous and plentiful, serving up a delicious 16 victims, all of whom actually manage in one way or another to be memorable, even with some of the more minor characters such as Maria, the reporter, along with the EMT and the police officer at the end of the film, all being minor characters, but all managing to stand out for their small allotted amount of screen time. My favorite character in the film has to be Herman, played by Michael J. Pollard, who is perfectly lecherous in this role. Though admittedly, his death scene was more than a bit weak, and I'll never remember him for this film. Instead, that will always go to his masterpiece, Next of Kin. My second favorite, by a slim margin, is Snowboy, played by Kyle Holman, who fits in this film perfectly, if for no other reason than the film's rocking soundtrack. Also, I find this character incredibly relatable, although the funniest character has to be Bobby, played by Haynes Brooks, who gets a lot of mileage out of what otherwise could have been a one-dimensional character. Instead, we get a fucking riot, as every line out of this guy's mouth is solid gold. Sadly, my least favorite character has to be Officer Whitmore. Not because of the quality of the work or the quality of the character, but because of how underutilized his death was. Sure, his death does stand out as being notable, due to him being killed with a firearm. It just came as a real letdown after the two being hyped up over the course of the film.
Hey, what would you do if you ever met her?
I'd kill her.
I would have liked to see some sort of final confrontation here, even if he was still at the losing end. It just felt that the fight was too one-sided here, and maybe something more elaborate was planned, like with the reporter, though budgetary constrictions probably would never have let it come to fruition. Final thoughts. Sure, this installment might not be my favorite part of the series, but I think it's my favorite of the sequels that follow this line of continuity. As Return to Sleepaway Camp will create its own when we get there. Teenage Wasteland does a great job with the pacing in this film, and it manages it really well. And I think this is mainly done by the fact that they broke the cast into 3 groups. Each day, she visits a new group of characters, keeping the faces feeling fresh, but forcing Angela to go through the bodies fairly quickly. Also, by diminishing the amount of screen time to just those short times, they're really able to focus for a small period of time on just those characters, allowing them to really stand out. Teenage Wasteland really knows how to have fun with itself, and I can't help but feel that this was the general feeling and tone that the director was going for with the first film, but somehow just missed the mark. This time around, he hit it pretty squarely on, and we get a very fun sequel. Sure, still not as good as the original, but few rarely are. And speaking of bad sequels, that brings us to next month's episode, which will be on Sleepaway Camp 4, I believe now? Survivor, which went through more than a few issues during production.